Every scientific age is defined not only by what it discovers, but by what it is prepared to recognize. Occasionally, something appears that does not demand explanation, only acknowledgement. It enters quietly, behaves according to known laws, and leaves before certainty can form. We catalog it, name it, and reassure ourselves that it fits. The object known as 3I Atlas is one such arrival. It does not announce danger, it does not offer proof. It simply passes through our awareness and forces a decision about what kind of universe we believe we inhabit. This episode is not about what 3I Atlas is. It is about the different stories we tell ourselves to remain comfortable with its existence. The most conservative interpretation of 3I Atlas is also the most destabilizing. It tells us that the solar system is not isolated, that matter moves freely between stars, that our cosmic neighborhood is not a private residence but a thoroughfare. Objects born elsewhere can enter, interact gravitationally, and leave without consequence or concern. This alone dismantles a deeply ingrained assumption that meaningful events in space are either local or deliberate. Instead, 3I Atlas points to a universe structured around motion rather than intention. Star systems form, eject material, and exchange fragments over billions of years, creating a slow, continuous circulation of matter across the galaxy. In such a universe, nothing truly belongs anywhere for long. This perspective requires no speculation. It rests entirely on physics we already accept. Planetary formation is violent. Debris is expelled. Interstellar space, though vast, is not empty in function. It is a medium through which histories migrate. 3I Atlas may be older than Earth, older than the Sun, a remnant of processes that occurred long before intelligence arose anywhere we know of. If so, its presence here is not meaningful in a personal sense, but contextual. It reminds us that we are late arrivals in a universe that has been active for incomprehensible spans of time. Civilizations, if they arise, do so inside systems that are already interconnected by material exchange. Under this lens, 3I Atlas is not a mystery, but a correction. It corrects the illusion of isolation. It reframes the solar system as a node in a larger network of motion. It forces us to confront a quiet truth. The universe does not arrange itself to be understood. It does not pause for observers. It moves, and occasionally that movement intersects with our instruments long enough to be noticed. The discomfort here is subtle but profound. If the universe is open, then we are not sheltered. We are simply unnoticed most of the time. There is a difference between what physics allows and what scientific culture encourages. Physics is permissive. It defines constraints, not narratives. Scientific institutions, however, are human systems shaped by funding, reputation, peer review, and professional risk. Within those systems, not all questions are equally safe to ask. Some are avoided, not because they are impossible, but because they are destabilizing. 3I Atlas exists uncomfortably close to that boundary. It is undeniably interstellar, it is undeniably foreign, and yet discussion around it is deliberately narrow, confined to classification, trajectory, and surface-level behavior. This is not censorship, it is self-regulation. Modern science is optimized to reward solvable problems, repeatable experiments, and incremental progress. Interstellar objects offer none of these. They cannot be revisited, they cannot be instrumented directly, they cannot be interrogated on demand. Once they leave, uncertainty becomes permanent. As a result, deeper implications are quietly deprioritized. Papers focus on what can be modeled, not on what cannot be resolved. Questions that drift toward origin, persistence, or non-natural possibility are framed as unproductive, even when they violate no physical law. The effect of this restraint is subtle but powerful. It shapes public perception by omission. When certain lines of inquiry are never fully explored, the absence itself is interpreted as resolution. Viewers assume that if something mattered, it would be discussed. But science does not function as a complete map of possibility. It functions as a negotiated terrain of acceptable inquiry. Ideas that are too speculative to defend within institutional norms are left untouched even when they are logically permissible. This creates a blind spot, not a conspiracy, but a silence. And silence has weight. It signals that there are places curiosity does not go, not because it cannot, but because it is not rewarded for doing so. In the case of 3I Atlas, this silence becomes part of the phenomenon itself. The object passes through, data is gathered, explanations are proposed, and then the conversation ends. What remains unspoken is not evidence of insignificance, it is evidence of caution, and caution, when repeated enough times, begins to resemble avoidance. Humanity has always searched for intelligence elsewhere by listening for noise, radio signals, laser flashes, structured emissions that resemble language or intent. This approach assumes that intelligence expresses itself outwardly, that awareness seeks recognition, and that observation culminates in contact. These assumptions feel natural because they mirror our own behavior. But they are not required by physics, logic, or survival. In fact, on sufficiently long time scales, they may be liabilities. A universe that routinely erases civilizations through impacts, radiation, and instability rewards subtlety, not announcement. In such a universe, the most stable form of presence may be one that is never noticed at all. Observation does not require communication, data does not require dialogue, awareness does not require empathy. A sufficiently advanced system would not need to engage directly with planets to learn about them. Atmospheres can be sampled remotely. Biosignatures can be inferred from spectral lines. Electromagnetic leakage reveals technological activity without consent. Gravitational interactions reveal mass distributions without cooperation. Even human civilization, loud and young as it is, already broadcasts its presence unintentionally. To an external observer, Earth does not need to be visited to be understood. It needs only to be passed. This reframes interstellar objects entirely. An object that drifts through star systems without altering them, without signaling, without slowing down, would be indistinguishable from debris. And that indistinguishability would be an advantage. It would survive longer. It would attract less attention. It would operate below the threshold of concern. From our perspective, such an object would look inert, natural, and unremarkable. From another perspective, it could function as a sensor, a recorder, or simply a witness. Not a probe in the cinematic sense, but an extension of awareness embedded in motion itself. Under this lens, 3I Atlas does not need to be artificial to be unsettling. Its existence alone demonstrates that objects can traverse star systems passively, gathering context simply by being present. Whether or not anyone is watching, the mechanism exists. The universe already supports surveillance without intention, observation without engagement, and presence without identity. If intelligence elsewhere has learned to exploit these mechanisms, then observation would not feel like anything at all. There would be no moment of contact, no signal, no revelation, just the quiet realization long after the fact that we were never as unobserved as we imagined. This is not a claim of being watched. It is a dismantling of an assumption that observation must announce itself. In a universe that favors endurance, silence may be the dominant language. And if that is true, then the absence of evidence does not imply absence of awareness, it implies success. One of the most persistent assumptions in human thought is that we are early enough to discover, early enough to matter, early enough to meet others at comparable stages of development. But the universe offers no such guarantees. Time does not distribute opportunity evenly. Stars formed billions of years before the sun. Planets cooled, stabilized, and evolved long before Earth existed. If intelligence is not vanishingly rare, then it likely arose elsewhere long before humanity's first tools, languages, or myths. And if intelligence is fragile, then it may also disappear quickly, leaving behind little more than altered environments and scattered remnants. Under this lens, the so-called cosmic silence takes on a different character. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of aftermath. A galaxy that has already experimented with intelligence many times may no longer be noisy. Civilizations may flare briefly and vanish, either through self-destruction, environmental collapse, or simple irrelevance. Those that endure may withdraw, compress, or fade into forms that no longer produce obvious signals. What remains is a universe that appears quiet not because nothing happened, but because what happened is over. Interstellar objects then become archaeological artifacts rather than messengers. not tools of contact, but remnants of processes that outlasted their creators. A fragment ejected from a long-dead system drifting for eons is exactly what one would expect in a galaxy where activity peaked early. In such a universe, humanity is not late to the party. We are late to the ruins. We are explorers walking through a landscape where the builders are gone, trying to infer intention from debris and absence from silence. This perspective reframes our expectations dramatically. We stop waiting for greetings and start looking for traces, not signals, but scars. Not messages, but patterns of depletion, alteration, and abandonment. Dyson-scale engineering, planetary sterilization, or subtle chemical anomalies would not announce themselves as intelligence. They would announce themselves as absence, imbalance, or unnatural regularity. The universe would not speak, it would bear marks. From this viewpoint, 3I Atlas is not significant because of what it is, but because of when we encountered it. It is a reminder that our observational moment is brief, our context incomplete, and our assumptions shaped by a narrow slice of cosmic history. If intelligence elsewhere rose and fell long before we looked up, then the silence we hear is not rejection. It is indifference. The universe did not wait for us to arrive before doing what it does best: experimenting, discarding, and moving on. And that possibility carries a different kind of weight. Not fear, but loneliness of timing. Not danger, but irrelevance. A realization that we may not be pioneers in a quiet universe, but newcomers in a galaxy that has already exhausted many of its possibilities implies success. Imagine for a moment that advanced extraterrestrial technology is not rare, dramatic, or obvious. Imagine instead that it is old, subtle, and optimized for persistence rather than performance. In that universe, alien technology would not resemble our machines. It would not announce itself with energy expenditure, visible structures, or intentional contact. It would resemble what endures: objects that survive radiation, time, and distance, systems that require no maintenance, mechanisms that use gravity instead of fuel and patience instead of speed. From our perspective, such technology would be indistinguishable from debris. It would appear inert, silent, and natural, because appearing natural would be its greatest strength. In this model, interstellar objects like 3I Atlas are not curiosities but expected artifacts. Not because every such object is technological, but because the galaxy would be filled with a mixture of natural remnants and artificial ones that converge in appearance over time. Ancient technology would not remain shiny or recognizable. It would erode, fragment, and simplify until only function remained. Sensors would become structure, structure would become geometry, geometry would become motion. After millions of years, intent would no longer be visible, only outcome. This resolves a problem that has haunted the search for extraterrestrial intelligence from the beginning. We keep looking for things that look like us: signals, broadcasts, deliberate messages. But longevity selects against those behaviors. The civilizations that survive are not the loudest, they are the least detectable. Over time, technology would evolve away from expression and toward invisibility, not because of fear, but because invisibility works. In such a universe, the most advanced systems would not dominate the sky. They would pass through it unnoticed. Under this assumption, the question, "Is 3I Atlas artificial?" becomes less important than a deeper realization. We may already be surrounded by alien technology that we lack the conceptual tools to recognize, not because it is beyond physics, but because it is beyond our expectations. We mistake endurance for randomness, silence for absence, stability for nature. If this model is correct, then alien technology is not something we are waiting to find. It is something we have been misclassifying all along. For most of its existence, humanity was quiet. Our planet leaked almost no detectable signals into space. Earth would have appeared biologically active, but technologically insignificant. Then, abruptly, that changed. Radio transmissions began spilling outward at the speed of light. Radar pulses swept the sky. Television broadcasts, military scans, and intentional messages announced not just our presence, but our curiosity. We did not whisper, we shouted, we did not wait to be discovered, we actively searched, assuming that discovery would be mutual and benign. From our perspective, this behavior was innocent, curiosity-driven, even noble. But curiosity does not exist in a vacuum. In a universe where observation is passive and long-term, sudden noise stands out. A technological civilization broadcasting its existence is not sending a greeting. It is altering its visibility profile. It is changing how it appears from afar. In such a universe, the moment a civilization becomes detectable may be the moment it enters a different category entirely, not a target, not a threat, simply a signal that something has changed. Under this lens, the timing becomes unsettling. Interstellar objects have likely passed through our system long before humanity existed. But our ability to notice them coincides with our decision to announce ourselves. We built instruments to listen outward at the same time we learned how to broadcast inward. We framed the universe as silent because it did not respond in ways we recognized. But what if silence was never disinterest? What if it was discretion? A galaxy optimized for endurance would not rush to greet every emerging civilization. It would wait, it would observe, it would note changes in behavior rather than declarations of intent. In this framework, humanity did not receive an invitation. We sent one. Not deliberately, but persistently. Through decades of emissions, searches, and announcements, we signaled not just that we exist, but that we are looking. And looking is not neutral. It implies readiness. It implies expectation. It implies a desire to be known. If alien technology exists in the quiet, drifting form we have imagined, then our sudden visibility may not provoke contact. It may provoke attention. And attention does not require interaction. This is not a warning. It is not a claim of consequence. It is a reframing of agency. We tend to imagine ourselves as passive observers in a vast universe, waiting for something else to act. But in reality, we have already acted. We altered our detectability. We changed our profile. We moved from background noise to signal. If something ancient, patient, and technologically subtle exists, then the most significant event may not be its arrival. It may be the moment it noticed we were finally loud enough to be noticed at all. And that returns us to 3I Atlas, not as proof, not as messenger, but as a symbol, a reminder that the universe does not need to announce when attention shifts. It does not need to arrive with ceremony. Sometimes it simply passes through while we argue about whether it belongs, unaware that the more important question may be whether we asked it to look our way in the first place. Imagine an alternate version of our own history, not one where humanity broadcasts its presence eagerly, but one where we are still young, divided, and uncertain when a signal arrives from the stars. The signal is unmistakably artificial, narrowband, repeating, structured in a way nature does not produce. It resembles, uncomfortably, the very kinds of transmissions we ourselves were beginning to emit in the early days of radio and radar. It is not advanced in an incomprehensible way. It is familiar enough to be understood, yet foreign enough to be alarming. In that moment, curiosity would not be the dominant response. Survival would be. Our first question would not be, who are they? It would be, do they know we exist? And immediately after that, should we let them? The realization would set in that we are visible, that someone far older or more capable may be listening, and that any response could reveal far more than we intend. The rational impulse would not be to answer but to stop transmitting, to go quiet, to minimize leakage, to retreat into the background noise of the universe until we understood what kind of intelligence we were dealing with. Silence in that context would not be fear, it would be strategy. This reaction is not hypothetical psychology, it is how intelligent systems behave under uncertainty. When the cost of exposure is unknown but potentially catastrophic, the safest move is concealment. Militaries practice this instinctively. Stealth technology exists for this reason. Information security is built around it. Even biological organisms freeze, camouflage, or hide when confronted with ambiguous threats. The idea that a civilization would respond to first contact by becoming quieter, not louder, is not paranoid, it is adaptive. Now, extend that logic across time. A civilization that survives its first detection scare learns a lesson. Visibility is vulnerability, expression is exposure. Over generations, this lesson would harden into doctrine. Transmissions would be reduced, then eliminated. Active signaling would be replaced by passive listening. Exploration would shift from presence to absence. The goal would no longer be to announce existence, but to ensure continuity. Technology would evolve toward minimal signatures, low observability, and naturalistic behavior. Not because the universe is hostile, but because it is unknown, and unknowns punish arrogance. Under this lens, the silence we observe is no longer mysterious. It is procedural. Advanced civilizations are not quiet because nothing is there. They are quiet because something might be. A galaxy that has experienced even a single catastrophic misjudgment would learn quickly that announcing oneself is a phase, not a destination. The loud civilizations are the young ones. The quiet ones are the survivors. This reframes interstellar exploration entirely. Exploration does not mean contact. It does not mean landing or signaling or dialogue. It means presence without footprint. It means gathering information while appearing inert. It means becoming indistinguishable from the background. In such a universe, the most advanced exploratory tools would not look like spacecraft. They would look like debris, objects that drift, objects that follow gravitational paths, objects that do not respond, do not transmit, and do not reveal intent. From the outside, they would appear natural. From the inside, they would represent a philosophy shaped by fear, restraint, and experience. And this is where the thought turns inward. Humanity did not follow this path. We did the opposite. We broadcast before we understood the implications. We transmitted before we considered asymmetry. We assumed that curiosity would be met with curiosity, that discovery would be mutual, that the universe would mirror our intentions. But if we had received a signal first, if we had been the ones confronted with evidence of another intelligence while still fragile and uncertain, our behavior would almost certainly have been different. We would have gone quiet. We would have hidden. We would have watched. If that instinct is universal, then silence is not emptiness, it is memory. A collective survival paranoia baked into the behavior of civilizations that lasted long enough to learn caution. In that universe, exploration continues, but invisibly. Observation persists, but without acknowledgement. And the greatest sign of intelligence is not communication, but restraint. Seen this way, the universe is not ignoring us. It is behaving exactly as we would have behaved if we had been wise enough, early enough to be afraid. When all of these perspectives are placed side by side, a single realization might take hold and begins to emerge, quiet but unavoidable. The universe does not reward noise. It rewards endurance. 3i Atlas, whether natural or artificial, whether meaningful or incidental, forces us to confront a truth larger than itself. Reality operates on scales where patience matters more than intention and survival matters more than expression. We have spent decades asking why the universe is silent, assuming silence means emptiness or indifference. But silence may be the product of experience. It may be what remains after civilizations learn, sometimes the hard way, that announcing oneself is a phase and restraint is an achievement. In that light, interstellar objects stop being curiosities and start being context. They are reminders that motion precedes meaning, that history migrates whether anyone is ready for it, and that intelligence, if it survives long enough, likely learns to blend in rather than stand out. The most unsettling takeaway is not that alien technology might exist, or that we may have invited attention through our signals, or even that others might be observing quietly. The most unsettling takeaway is that none of this requires hostility, conspiracy, or intention. It requires only time, learning, and memory. A universe that has experimented with intelligence for billions of years would not be dramatic. It would be cautious. It would be quiet. And into that quiet, humanity has stepped loudly, curious, and hopeful, unaware that curiosity itself is a signal. 3i Atlas does not tell us what is out there. It tells us something about what endures. And what endures is not the loudest voice, but the one that learns when not to speak. If there is a lesson here, it is not about fear or retreat. It is about maturity. about recognizing that participation in a vast universe is not measured by how brightly we announce ourselves, but by how carefully we learn to listen, how responsibly we choose to be seen, and whether we are wise enough to understand that sometimes the greatest intelligence is knowing when silence is not absence but survival. I like to think that the universe is one shaped by patience and responsibility. 3i Atlas no longer stands as a warning or an omen. It becomes a reminder that motion does not imply intent, and presence does not require participation. Whether natural or artificial, whether meaningful or incidental, it exists within a cosmos that has learned to let things unfold. The silence we encounter may not be the silence of absence, nor the silence of danger, but the silence of restraint. A silence born from civilizations that learned over immense spans of time that interference carries consequences, that knowledge delivered too early can fracture rather than enlighten, and that autonomy is fragile. In such a universe, intelligence does not rush toward contact. It waits, it listens, it observes without shaping outcomes. Humanity stands at an early point on that path. We are curious, expressive, and eager to be known. That is not a flaw. It is a stage. But as we continue to look outward, perhaps the deeper lesson is not about who might be watching or why they remain quiet. Perhaps the lesson is about what we are becoming, about whether we will one day choose to speak less, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Whether we will learn that the measure of intelligence is not how loudly it announces itself to the universe, but how carefully it chooses when to intervene and when to simply let the universe continue telling its own story. If the cosmos has anything to teach us through objects like 3i Atlas, it is this: maturity is not marked by conquest or contact, but by restraint. And the quiet we hear when we look into the dark may not be emptiness at all, but evidence that others learned that lesson long before we did.